Hello and welcome to episode 87 of MMO Weekly, presented by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by MMO's own a miners enthusiast, prospect knower, draft lover, Matt Mancuso. Matt, thanks so much for coming on with us tonight, man. We appreciate it.
Of course, Sal. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And listen, the Mets won today. 2 games over 500. They're officially in the third wild card spot, but we're not here to talk about that right now. Not the present. We're here to talk about the future. The MLB draft is on Sunday, 7 p.m. in Texas. Mets have the 19th pick if folks aren't familiar. So we want to just obviously have you on just to get your thoughts and what you're hearing as far as what the Mets could be selecting. I know that the different powers that be have some different mocks up, but just want to get your thoughts here on the draft coming up on Sunday and the Mets position here at 19.
Yeah, of course. As you said, this is really kind of the first step of David Stearns is, push towards the future. It's not really about kind of the now for the Mets, it's the coming seasons. And that was kind of evidence with the trades they did last year with trading away Scherzer and trading away Verlander and selecting Colin Houck with their first round pick last year. They have, I think that was pick 32. And, they have 19 this year. So a lot of the mocks have kind of come out recently, having them go more of like college bat, which is kind of a profile they've gone towards in kind of the recent years. And especially too, because this is the first draft that David Stearns is involved in. And that was kind of a big selection for the Brewers. That's kind of what they picked the last few years.
Interesting. So something I was going to ask you as well. It's obviously, like you said, Stearns' first draft. It seems like the last few drafts, the regimes over here, the Billy Eppers of the world, went for more athleticism. More, I don't know if it's more upside guys, but it seemed like they liked particularly high school arms and bats the last few years. So, like you're saying, you think the model here will change a bit, that they'll profile more of potentially college bats, maybe something a little more polished guys that can kind of contribute more quickly, or is that incorrect?
No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. A lot of the main prospect pundits online, such as the guys from MLB.com and Fangraphs and The Athletic, have all released mocks in the last 24 hours, and they all have the Mets selecting a college bat.
It's interesting. I'm looking now. Metsmerized had put up something. Obviously, it's the big four. You got the MLB Pipeline, ESPN, The Athletic, Baseball America, right there, mocks. ESPN, funny enough, has the Mets selecting a right-hand pitcher from Iowa. It seems like the other three are kind of comp the same as far as what you're talking about, as far as that college bat. But do you know of anything as far as this pitcher from Iowa, and if you think that pitching will be more of an importance for the Mets in this draft? Do you think it'll be more so, more like you're talking about, more polished kind of collegiate bats?
I'm assuming you're talking about Brody Brink.
Yep, correct.
Cool. Yeah, no, he's been very interesting. He's basically brand new to baseball.
Okay.
And he has a few really awesome pitches. They're two of the best pitches in the draft. But the thing is, his command, that's always been a little bit iffy. And, it makes sense. He's brand new to baseball. He just quit, I believe it was being a wide receiver in college to focus on pitching. So he's, an unfinished product.
Okay.
But, the Mets pitching development program has gotten a lot better in the last few years. So much so that, they are on the brink of a lot of their draft selections.
Sure.
In fact, in the majors, we've seen that, this year with Christian Scott, and then, several others coming up before him, like Mike Vasil and Dom Hamill. And those are high round selections that the Mets have had, or the Mets have made in the last few seasons. So yeah, he'd be a really interesting name. He'd be more in the lines of a Tidwell Spratt, where it's more of a power pitcher,
Sure.
instead of a Vasil Hamill. But yeah, no, he'd be a really interesting name. I think he's been mocked a lot to the teams that have excellent pitching development programs, such as I think the Orioles, the Dodgers, the Yankees have all been excellent. And he's all been connected to them. And if the Mets can get his hands on him, and try to work out the command issues he's facing, I think that'd be a great pick for them. that really kind of improve kind of the ceiling of some of the pitching they have in the minor league system. They don't really have like going through their minor league system. They don't really
Sure.
have like an ace, and that's a role that Brett could help fill.
Interesting. And since you're talking about someone that just solely started focusing on pitching in baseball, is that someone that could profile earlier in the first round or possibly later? Like, is that slotted around 19? Do you think that's something that could be realistic for them? I'm a little curious since he seems like that's kind of like a wild card kind of prospect, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I could. I think he's been projected in the early 20s right now.
Okay.
So, I mean, again, anything can happen
Sure.
come Sunday, and that's the part that we love about the draft, and especially this draft too, where really no one has any idea what's going on at 1. It's not like basketball last year when everyone knew Wemby was going 1-1.
Sure.
There's quite a few names going on at 1, and a lot of mocks were saying today, like the information they have received, they really can't even tell the guy that's going to go down at 1, and that's going to have downstream effects later on the board, which certainly impacts the Mets at 19.
So we talked about the pitchers. Obviously, you were talking about college bats as far as more of a realistic pick here for the Mets. It seems like one person that the Athletic has the Mets linked to here mocked is Carson Bange. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right, but he's an outfielder and it seems like a right-handed pitcher, so a two-way player from Oklahoma State. Not someone I've heard of before. I'm wondering if maybe you can kind of fill us in a little bit there, because that sounds like another kind of interesting prospect that could be on their hands.
Absolutely, yeah. Bench has been linked to the Mets from their first, mocks of the year, and that's definitely a really interesting profile because the Mets made a very similar selection with another two-way player from Oklahoma State University last year in Nolan McLean.
Yep.
Who is just dominating, and has enjoyed a really excellent season in the Mets system. So that's definitely a place that they've scouted a lot. Bench is definitely very interesting. He is his hit and power is very good, and the Athletic and MLB.com has mocked him to the Mets in recent days. So there seems to be a lot of smoke in between them. I remember early last year where it was kind of the same situation. The Mets, from the beginning, were like linked to Jet Williams. So I'm just wondering if it's a similar situation here where, Bench is the profile and the guy that they kind of had their eyes on from the beginning. And that's kind of, what transpires on draft night. But who knows really where he's going to go. He certainly fits in that selection of college bats that are linked to the Mets in the mid to low teens. And really, any of them can go in between like 15 and like 22.
Wow. So I'm assuming that the bat is going to be what moves forward. He wouldn't be a two-way player in the pros. That's something that he's talked about. I'm curious now. It seems like now that Ohtani kind of opened the door, like you said, the Mets drafted a player from the same school last year that's doing it now. But it's so hard. So I'm just kind of curious if that's something that he's going to try and maybe would be a realistic shot at trying in pro ball.
The Mets maybe will grant him that opportunity,
Sure.
but from what I've read from reports, that's not really a realistic possibility.
Got it.
That I would think for Carson Bench. Unfortunately, it'd be a really cool story, if the Mets were to go out and get him, and they get two Oklahoma State guys back-to-back years who are two-way players. The Mets have certainly reaped those benefits this season with McLean. But yeah, no, the bat is kind of what drives the profile here. It's definitely one of the better college bats in the entire draft. It's a very interesting swing. The end has kind of been comped to Griffey, which is just a name. In no way, shape, or form does that have anything to do with his realistic ceiling or realistic floor. But it is an interesting, aspect to note. There were like signs saying, anything middle, anything down, he drives, and he's excellent at that, but he might struggle with pitches at the top of the zone.
Mm-hmm.
But the reports did say he was able to like foul them off, so he was able to make contact with them, even if it wasn't strong, excellent contact. But he really was able to succeed in pitches in the middle and lower half of the plate.
Interesting. Yeah, you see the right-handed pitcher there. Excuse me, folks. Excuse me. But you see a two-way there. It's interesting. But, another left-handed bat. I believe the Mets had another Oklahoma State product that they drafted a few years ago that ended up working out pretty good. Or was Michael Conforto from Oregon State? If I screwed that up, then that's totally on me. But I thought he went to Oklahoma State.
I think he went to Oregon.
Went to Oregon State.
Yeah,
They're
I think he went
orange.
to
They have a
Oregon.
state. I'm sorry, everybody.
No,
That's
no.
okay. But I do want to move on now. The as far as the Baseball America's comp or mock, I should say, they have the Mets taking a player named Seaver King out of Wake Forest, a shortstop and an outfielder. Great first name. If the Mets do draft him, he's got that going for him. But I'm wondering if you know a little bit about him.
Yeah, so the cool thing about King is, there's, Wake Forest is an absolute baseball factory right now. There are two guys in the top 10 who are pretty realistically going to get selected in the top 10 come Sunday, and Nick Kurtz, and then Chase Burns, and then there's another, but Josh Hartle. But his stock has kind of fallen as the years gone on. But yeah, Wake Forest, sorry, is an absolute factory right now in terms of baseball products, and King is just kind of the most recent product of Wake Forest. King is a shortstop, which kind of fits into kind of the Stearns mold. If I remember right, he selected a shortstop with his first round pick. If it wasn't last year, it was the year before. So he likes those up the middle kind of players. The bat seems pretty solid. It seems like it's capable of kind of a line drive swing where the Mets, may need to coke a little more power. But it does seem like he is pretty, that it'd be a pretty good selection there.
Interesting. It seems like a lot still athletic guys, but more polished, like you're talking about. So that seems like an interesting player as well. Shortstop can kind of translate, right? They're athletes, and you can kind of, if the bat plays and stuff like that, the athleticism, you want to go there. But lastly, I know MLB Pipeline, they actually have the Mets mocking a high school player, Slade Caldwell, an outfielder at a Valley View High School in Arkansas. Again, not someone I'm particularly familiar with, but I'm wondering if maybe you can kind of fill us in a little bit about, this kind of player.
For sure. Yeah, so Caldwell is one of the best high school players in the entire nation. The Mets certainly have a history with selecting high school players, going back a little bit late with Brett Beatty, and last year's selection of, 2 years ago's selection of Jet Williams. It's very similar to King, where it's kind of like a line drive profile, and you need to maybe get a little more power out of the profile. But it is very similar to Williams, where it is kind of that short stature, and kind of that smaller strike zone. But it's nice bat speed, and it's certainly a very similar profile to Williams, and that's kind of a pick that's really looked really good in hindsight. So if the Mets were to get a Jet Williams 2.0 in this draft, one, this would kind of be that guy, and two, that would be an excellent selection.
Interesting. See that, comp there to a high school player again. But I guess out of the players we talked, there's the one in particular that you like the most. You like to see the Mets select. If there's someone that's kind of been mocked up so far that you think the Mets should take, I'm just curious your kind of thoughts there.
Yeah, for sure. There are certainly a few guys who are going to get picked in that area, if not a little higher, a little bit lower, that the Mets have either been connected to, or that I personally like. Probably going into Sunday, the realistic expectation is a guy maybe like Carson Bench. He's going to go around that area, and we'll kind of see where he lands come Sunday. Some other guys that haven't been mentioned, his Bench has a very similar profile to Ryan Waldschmidt, who is a college outfielder, and he's basically like Bench, but maybe the offensive profile is a little bit better. So a guy like Waldschmidt would definitely be really nice. The Mets have also been roughly connected to Vance Honeycutt, who is an outfielder who had just had a 25-25 season, if I remember that correctly, while in college. The issue with him is, the power is there, the speed is there. He has 4 excellent tools right now. The one tool that isn't great is his hit tool. And that's something that I think the Mets player development program hasn't exactly thrived at yet. Certainly, I'm sure there's stuff going into the organization. David Stearns made that very clear, that the Mets were going to be kind of the Dodgers from the top to the bottom, and the Dodgers have done so well in the last decade to uh, really kind of redevelop, I guess, their hitters and find what works best for them. Um, and that's something that the Mets certainly are hoping to emulate. And this is certainly a project. Honeycutt certainly is, because the swing is a little bit iffy right now. I think I remember hearing that he had really high chase rates in college last year, and I was listening to a podcast earlier today with Jim Callis of MLB.com, and he said there's been no real successful major leaguers who's had a K rate that high in college.
Wow.
That have turned out to be good selection. So it's certainly an interesting pick because he has 4 excellent tools. The 5th one is always kind of the most important in my eyes, which is a hit. And if Honeycutt, or let's say like Brent, was on Brody Brink was on the board, I'd probably select the latter, because I trust the Mets pitcher development program a little bit more, just because of the results we've been seeing both at the major and minor league levels. Guys like Christian Scott and Tyler Stewart, and even some of their more recent selections, more their high profile ones, like Sprout and Tidwell. That's really kind of paid dividends so far. So it's been excellent to see that. I don't think the Mets have selected kind of a high school pitcher, I believe, since Scott Kazmir, since in 2002.
Wow.
So I don't really see that as a realistic possibility coming Sunday. Obviously, it's a new front office driven by Stearns. But, as we're all aware, he is very analytical friendly, and selecting a high school pitcher is one of the riskier things you can do. It's worked certainly in the past with, Jackson Jobe blowing up through the major leagues right now, and Andrew Painter looked really good. But then that's the issue. You never know where these high school arms are going to go. And Painter's, coming back from Tommy John now. So that's the one profile I really don't see in, are expected to be selected by the Mets at 19. There aren't really a lot of fantastic, or there's not really a lot of high school arms projected to go in the first round. So this is definitely a profile that I do not see the Mets entertaining really. But definitely college bats, especially the guys that we've mentioned, is certainly something that I see as a realistic expectation with pick number 19.
Interesting. That it's funny, right? Baseball draft is so different from the other sports, whereas you don't really draft for need ever for immediate fixes. You look at, like what you're saying, what your organization develops well. Looking at the risk versus reward, like you're talking about, as far as high school arms to college and college bats too. It's very interesting. The Mets are obviously, we know, right there. It seems like in a nice little spot there at 19 to get some quality players. But
Exactly.
we talked before just about how, like, there's no Paul Skeens of the draft to hear. There's no undisputed number 1 pick, so to speak. Like you said, it's probably going to come down to the wire. And in your opinion, is there any can't miss players in this draft that maybe you folks should know about? I know the kid from Georgia has had a great year. I've heard a lot about him, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are as far as like some can't miss prospects here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you mentioned, the guy from Georgia, Carly Condon, I think that hit tool is legitimate. I do know there has been, concerns, a little bit of concerns about it, but it's kind of like nitpicking it, like the same with Skeen's fastball shape, last summer. We all know Skeen's had, a 70, 80 grade fastball, but then you looked at the shape and you were like, but people were like, hey, that's nitpicking too much. And then he's come to the major leagues and just kind of dominated there.
Sure.
Some other guys that household names that I think people should know is one Condon. Travis Benzana has a really cool story. He's from Australia. He grew up playing cricket, and now he's in contention for the number 1 pick, which is really unheard of. Only 38 Australian-born players have played in Major League Baseball, so that's certainly an accomplishment. Jack Caglione, he is anyone's the modern day Ohtani. It's really him. He is a lefty power hitter who is projected to play first base in the majors, and the bat is projected to play. He also throws mid-90s from his left from his left side. So it's all, it's very interesting. And a team, I was reading that, like, it'd be interesting for the Athletics to grab him and kind of have them as their poster boy for their recent move to Sacramento
Sure.
and then to Las Vegas. Because he would definitely be that household name. It's something, that both the team and, the fans, as like a guy they could rally around just because he has that household name status. There are a few of very interesting profiles, especially in the second half, or sorry, the latter half of the draft. Um, Jurangelo Sinchit, I think that's how you say his name. He's a switch pitcher,
Oh,
and
wow. Oh, yes.
yes, and he is certainly really interesting. One arm throws mid 90s, the other arm low
Right.
90s.
Right.
So it's kind of, curious what would happen if you had a harder throwing Pat Venite. That kind of answers this question. I'm really interested to see where he's going to be selected, and he's from Mississippi State too. And the Mets have made kind of a habit of drafting, granted, hitters such as Jake Mangum from Mississippi State. So it's definitely going to be very interesting to see where he lands. Other guys who are probably going to be in, that top number one, top number two, draft chatter, include J.J. Weatherholt, Hagen Smith, Chase Burns, Nick Kurtz. There is a group of like 8 or 9 players in the top half of the draft that are selected to go among those 10 picks, and I'll just run through them really quick. Weatherholt might be a option for the Guardians at 11 if he can sort out if they can get a discount with him in the finances. But as other people have pointed out, since this draft class isn't so deep in terms of like impact talent, this may
Sure.
not be the best draft to do so. It's a similar situation where the Mets, went and got Matt Allen in the 3rd round. This maybe isn't the draft to save money early and then go get a player later on, just because this draft can go so many other ways. Chase Burns is an absolute monster in Wake Forest. The fastball is up to 101. It is a dominant off-speed pitch. It's going to be very interesting to see where he goes. There is talk, but I firmly believe this talk, that the Rockies are going to select a pitcher at 3. Though I'd say that's more kind of common knowledge at this point. You can't get a pitcher to Coors Field, so how are you going to develop them? You're going to
Sure.
draft them. And with Burns, the issue is that his fastball is really fast. It is 100, 101, and it was dominant. But the issue was the shape was not optimal, so that it was hit pretty hard in college. So if you go up to Coors in altitude, that shape might work out even worse.
Sure.
So the Rockies might go for someone like Hagen Smith, who's a lefty who sits in the mid 90s. He had an outstanding start earlier this season where he pitched 6 innings, 18 outs, and he struck out, if I remember right, 17 of those batters.
Wow.
So it was just like one of the best outings like
Sure.
I've ever seen on a baseball diamond. Nick Kurtz is a power hitting first baseman. There is talk of him either going to the Angels or the Pirates. You said you should never draft for need, but what have we learned? The Angels will go for the guy that is closest to the majors, and so far, Chantanal and Nito have kind of like followed that path along with Chase Siswell, or Self. I think that's how you say his last name. The Angels could also pivot to Braden Montgomery, who is an outfielder from Texas A&M. The issue is he just fractured his ankle in the college postseason, so he may not be fitting that timeline of a really fast-moving college bat that they'd like, but the bat there is legit. If any of those players were to fall down to 19, the Mets should grab them immediately, similar to a Rocker situation a few years ago.
Sure.
But I don't really know if that's realistic. There is this clumping of names, the names that I've mentioned, who I think are going to, get drafted in the first 10, 11 picks. But after that, this can really go any way. I wouldn't be shocked to see a few names like, Nick York or Xavier Isaac, who were guys that the Red Sox and the Rays selected like a couple of years ago in the first
Okay.
round, respectively. And these were people that people hadn't even heard of before. I think when the Rays selected Isaac, he wasn't anywhere either on Fangraphs or MLB.com, and that's no discredit to them. But the Rays did the research, and they said this is the guy they want. And right now, he's one of the best first base prospects in the entire majors. So I wouldn't be shocked to see, a few reaches like that, and that could kind of have really cascading effects down the entire draft. You just honestly don't know, and that's kind of the suspense leading up to Sunday. Really, anything can happen. Um, a couple more guys that I haven't mentioned yet that I wouldn't be too shocked for the Mets to grab. I'd actually like them is James Thibbs and Christian Moore, who are college hitters.
Okay.
Um, Thibbs is an advanced lefty hitter, and Moore just helped Tennessee in their postseason run. He had a really good postseason and really good like college World Series, and that may have pushed him up a few draft boards, similar to Will Bentner's performance a couple seasons ago in the College World Series. I think he had a 15 strikeout outing that pushed him up to the Giants. I believe at 16 at that point. So we'll see kind of what happens there. Bentner is just kind of the most high profile name that's happened to recently, but we'll see if Moore's recent performance has kind of propped him up kind of a few draft boards. We honestly don't know.
I think that's that's the cool part about this draft, right? Like you said, there's no absolute number one. There could be a few upset, so to speak, as far as like players getting drafted you may not think or something like. So that's that makes for it to be more interesting and another reason to tune in right outside of the Mets select. So should be great. We really appreciate you coming on and breaking this all down. It's always fun every year, and we'll see in the next couple of years, right? That's when we'll really know when how good these draft classes are and everything, and hopefully Stearns is first one here under the riding the helm is a good one. So we'll see. And until then, and with the big league club, hopefully the Mets can keep on winning and stay in that wild card spot. And it's a good second half after the All-Star break. But as always, folks, we'll catch you next week, and let's go Mets.